I Still Cry is one of the 4 poems I mentioned was an exception to the rule about my poetry being generalised so people could read it and relate to it. This poem is primarily about grief. It's not about the immediate grief that you experience after you have just lost someone in your life, in particular by death. It's about the grief you feel months or years afterwards, the kind of grief where the 1 year or 2 year or 5 year or 10-year anniversary of a loved one's death is approaching, or maybe something happens and you think of them. My mum often talks to me about something that happened during her day or something that would happen to her at work, and that she would say to herself, "Oh, I've got to tell mum that," referring to her own mother, my nana, who died 9 years ago. And when she has those moments for a split second, she forgets that her mother has passed away, and then in the next split second she remembers. That's the kind of grief that I'm referring to. I feel that grief never really goes away, no matter how much time has passed. Like, it eases, like you do eventually stop crying as much, and you do eventually go to sleep, and you do eventually get on with your life. It does ease, but it's never gone, and that's what I'm talking about with this poem. In this poem, I'm referring to a good friend of mine, George Matchett, who I knew from uni. He was one of the first people I met when I moved to Wollongong in 2010. He was friends with my then flatmates. I literally met him on my very first day in Wollongong, like a few hours after I moved into the flat I was living in, like the uni accommodation flat that I was living in. And I remember chatting to him at a pub where we all went to during O Week, where it was very loud and I felt I didn't fit in, and even though it was loud, he made the effort to listen to me because I was chatting to him about how I felt about, not fitting in. And he always said hello to me whenever he saw me. I even gave him a Christmas card and candy cane at the end of that year. In fact, he won the most popular resident award at the Campus East Awards night, which was where we lived at the time. In the next year, in 2011, we both lived at Campus East again, although I didn't see him as much because I lived in a self-catered unit and he lived in a flexi-catered unit and was the residential advisor, the RA of his area. That being said, he always said hi and he would talk to me. He would actually make the effort to talk to me. On March 23rd, 2011, he passed away. He went surfing with a few friends and he got caught in a rip and he drowned, and unfortunately he couldn't be revived. Like I said, his friends tried to revive him, but they couldn't, and those friends who tried to revive him ended up being pallbearers at his funeral. The story of his death actually made the front page of the Illawarra Mercury the day after he died, and it was also there was also a tribute story the day after so the 25th. On that particular day, on the 23rd, I remember I was at uni all day and I got a text message from Campus East reception saying that a critical incident had occurred and that there would be a meeting in the dining room. But I didn't go because I had my day booked with classes, and I thought that it might have been about a robbery or something, because robberies, they're not the biggest things on like campus or uni accommodation, but they do happen. On my way to my last class, I saw a friend of mine crying and I said to her, "What's wrong?" And she said, "George Matchett died this morning." And, excuse me. And I asked her if she was sure. At one point I got a message from Campus East about getting an email, and I was in shock for the rest of the afternoon after hearing that from my friend and waiting for this email. I didn't concentrate in class after hearing that. After class finished, I logged on to my Facebook account to see a heap of statuses in my news feed saying RIP and rest in peace, worst day of my life. And one of the RAs one of the RAs at Campus East, who happened to live in the unit across from me, was online, and I messaged him asking him if it was true, and he told me to come home. And on the bus on the way home, I just completely broke down and cried the whole way there, because I knew deep down that it was true. And I got there and he confirmed it for me. After he told me that, I called my parents and told them, and a few days later we found out that his funeral was the next week on March 31st, and that there would be buses arranged to take us to the funeral in Grenfell, which is about 4 hours from Wollongong. He was very popular. To give you an idea of exactly how popular he was, there are about a little over 600 people that live on Campus East per year, and about 200, maybe 250 of us went to his funeral. We all got up at 4 a.m. and met in the Campus East dining room, to have a bit of breakfast, and we left at 6 a.m. from Wollongong for the 1 p.m. service. the service went for 2 hours, and there were us Campus East people, plus people from his boarding school, plus his family and friends, plus people who lived with his family in Grenfell. The funeral had more than 1,000 people there. Going to Grenfell for the funeral, then being at the funeral, briefly at the wake, and the trip back was all done in one day, so it was very intense for all of us, both emotionally and physically. About a month later, the Campus East dining room was named after him because people said he spent all of his time in there, and his family came up for the revealing of the plaque to go on the doors. I didn't say anything to his parents because I didn't know what to say, but I ended up meeting them later when I was doing laundry all over Campus East because the washing machines in the cell-catered units where I lived weren't working, so I had to do it in other unit buildings. And his mother saw me and said to me, every time I see you with a laundry basket, because I had seen her around a couple of times that night trying to find free washing machines. And I told her about the machines not working, and she said to me, oh, I thought it was a way to meet boys. You can say to them, can you carry my washing? Can you help me? It was one of the funniest and nicest and surreal moments of my life, because I realised just how much of a wonderful, strong woman his mother is, to be able to go through what she was going through and be nice to every one of his friends, and to crack a joke with a stranger is absolutely incredible. We all saw his parents and his sisters. He was the oldest of 3 and he had 2 younger sisters, again at the 6-month anniversary of his death, which was in September, when we all went to the beach and put a reef in the ocean. On the 1-year anniversary, we all put candles in a trench in the sand, which I kept leaning on, and the sand kept collapsing on some of the candles, so I decided to back away a little bit. Nearly 3 years on, I still think about him and still cry about him. The loss of him, which is what this poem is about, and it's why I dedicated it to him. You know, I still think about the loss of him in that day sometimes, and like I said, that's what the poem is about, and that's why I dedicated it to him. And lots of people, his friends and the people who lived at Campus East in 2011, still do think about him and think about his death and think about that particular day. There was a cross at the beach made for him. We all cried at the 2011 Campus East Awards night at the end of that year, and so did the girl who was voted friendliest resident that year, like his successor. Not long after his death, I think his family had green armbands made with the phrase that George used to say, smiling saves lives, which are the words you see at the end of the video. I try to wear that armband every day, and even nearly 3 years on, I still see plenty of people wearing them, and the money from the sales of the armbands actually went to surf lifesaving. I hope you haven't viewed this as digressing or ranting, but I can't talk about this poem without the backstory, especially since it's one of the 4 poems that are exceptions to my generalising rule, and it is the first poem of the collection. It has a big backstory, and this poem is an important one to me.